Okay, welcome to the 11th in our series of Israel's LGBT organizations explained. This week we are very happy to have Jeremy Seeff with us. He is a board member of LGBTech, which is Israel's organization for, what do you tell us, Jeremy? I don't want to get it wrong.
Well, we are Israel's LGBT plus professional organization. So we work with both companies and the LGBT plus community on issues around workplace diversity and inclusion.
Fantastic. Okay. So thanks for joining us this evening. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Okay, where you're from and how long you've been in Israel?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm originally from London. I was born in Paris, but grew up in London. I've been in Israel on Thursday will be 7 years since I made Aliyah, so it's nearly my anniversary. Thank you. Yeah, grew up in London, as I said. My mum spent some of her time growing up in Israel, so I've always had very close connections to Israel, lots of family here. Made Aliyah in 2013, and I've been here ever since.
Excellent, excellent. So how did you get involved in LGBTech?
First of all, Shachar Grembeck, who's also just joined the call, who set up LGBTech in 2011, knew my sister. So I sort of met him originally through that connection. But I think, generally speaking, when I moved to Israel and was looking to build a network of connections, I didn't go to the army here, I hadn't been to school here. I was looking for basically an outlet of somewhere where I could find a community. Also from a social perspective, an LGBT plus community. So I came across what was at the time called Gay Tech. We've since rebranded for probably quite obvious reasons. And basically ended up going to one of their events. And pretty soon after that, also through the personal connection with Shachar, but also for something to get involved with, I ended up starting to help out with some of the events we were running. And since 2015, I've been involved in running the organization. Initially a little bit less, and more recently, sort of in more detail, in more depth.
Fantastic. So, why was LGBTech, or as it was Gay Tech, why was it started? What was its purpose? Has that changed at all?
So yes, it's changed in the sense that we've obviously expanded by quite a lot what we do. I mean, I think originally it was set up, I might not be the best person to talk to exactly the motivations for setting up in the first place, but originally it was set up basically to form a community of, at the time, gay people working in tech, so sort of a professional network. Pretty soon after that, and obviously, as you can tell from the name, we expanded that, and not to be just for gay guys, but really for everyone in the LGBT plus community. And even though the name is LGBTech, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little while, we obviously do a lot more than working with just tech companies. Through our work with companies, we work with banks, with companies, in many different sectors, and obviously the aim is to further increase that and to work with companies throughout, Israel's workforce.
Fantastic. So what kind of events does LGBTech organize?
So we run, usually we run a few big events in a year, so 4 big events, and then we may have some bespoke events. They tend to run on sort of yearly themes. So we'll always have like a very big Pride event. Last year, actually, in 2019, we ended up having about a Pride, a series of conference events. We had about 8 different events in a week. It was kind of crazy. Shai, who's also on the line, who's also one of the directors at LGBTech, was very, very involved in running that last year. This year, obviously, things are a little bit different, what with coronavirus. So we obviously didn't have quite as many physical events. We did actually have one physical event just last week at the British Ambassador's residence, where we hosted by video link the British Ambassador to the US. And we could talk about that a little bit more after if you want. But then we've also done a whole bunch of virtual things. You could probably see my background. We've got havepride.im, which is basically a virtual backgrounds program that we ran, allowing companies to acquire bespoke backgrounds for their team members for Zoom meetings, or individuals to come and make their own with or without a logo. Hope I'm pointing in the right direction. See the LGBTech logo there. Yeah. And then that's available to individuals for free, but we do ask anyone who's interested in doing so to make a small donation to help run LGBTech, and all of that can be found on the website, which I'm now hopefully pointing at. So that's another thing we did this Pride. So that's kind of one set of events, the Pride events. We tend to have sort of an HR workplace-focused event once a year, which might be sort of more around diversity and inclusion as a topic. We'll often have speakers from abroad. So some of our past speakers are the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Lord John Brown, who used to be the CEO of British Petroleum, or BP. We've had Dr. Vivian Ming, who's an amazing scientist from Silicon Valley. We've had Claire Harvey, who's an incredible Paralympian from the UK. You know, a whole host, as I mentioned, the current British ambassador to the US. A whole host of global leaders, and of course also leaders from our community here in Israel, people from MyHeritage, from IBM, from Microsoft, from all sorts of companies. So that's kind of another event we run. I think that kind of covers the gamut, and then we'll sometimes have bespoke events, either around a particularly inspiring person who might be coming to Israel, or if, you know, specific companies want to run events with us. We've had events with a whole host of companies in Israel. They may be smaller in nature, they may be bigger in nature. Our events can be anything from 30 or 40 people and up to 300 or 400 people. So those are the events that we run.
Fantastic. I remember a few years ago there was an event at the old British ambassador's place in Ramat Gan.
It's the same residence, but the ambassadors changed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I thought they were moving. Okay, I thought they were changing venue. Okay.
By the way, I should also add that we do also run some events which are not necessarily open to the public. For example, conferences for HR professionals. So we've hosted a couple of those, which might be sort of more in depth, looking at HR-related issues around diversity and inclusion. We also, by the way, and we could talk about this in a while as well, but we have a forum of ERGs, of employee resource groups. So for companies in Israel that either wish to set up, have already set up, or have a huge global employee resource group, like an LGBT plus sort of forum within their company. So we run an inter-company forum where we will talk about topics that are related to sort of the idea of setting up or running such an organization, such a group within a company. So we also run events about that, which are, again, not open to the public generally, but open to representatives of various companies, either who already run or who want to run such an internal group.
Fantastic. Okay. And so one of the things you do, as you mentioned, is you work with companies on a diversity program. Okay, trying to encourage companies or get companies to adhere to a standard to treat LGBT employees equally and correctly.
Yeah, so we do that in a few different ways. So we do that, first of all, just generally with our work, with our events, with raising awareness of issues around LGBT plus people in the workforce. We do that often with partnerships with company, whether it's raising money, for example, to sponsor scholarships for trans students, which we did with Ma'avarim, which I think we've already interviewed.
That's
I'm
right,
not sure
yeah.
if it was Ella or if it was Alicia, but with Ma'avarim, which is the trans organization in Israel. So we, at one of our events actually at the British Ambassador's residence back in 2016, I think it was, basically connected them and helped raise the initial seed money for those scholarships. So that's another way we do it. And then the main program also, through what we've called the Israel Diversity Standard, basically we work with companies that sign up to our program. We help them focus on their 3, 4, 5 main objectives for the first year of their joining the program, and then help them work through how to achieve those objectives. So that can be anything from reviewing their internal policies and forms and recruitment processes to make sure that the language and the way they do that is either blind or, in some cases where needed, even positively discriminative towards the LGBT plus community. It can be anything from helping them set up an ERG, like an employee resource group. It can be running seminars. We have training courses that we help either run ourselves or by connecting to relevant practitioners. So our resource development director, Alon Madal, for example, over the last month, I think has given about 18 or 19 lectures. I'm not sure what the final number was, but a very large number of lectures to companies talking about both his personal story, but also about some of the issues around LGBT plus diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
And how do you think, compared to other countries, or maybe how bad the situation or how good is the situation in Israel in terms of discrimination against LGBT community?
I actually was just listening the other day to a webinar that was run by the OECD, and they did a very interesting survey, which this webinar basically came to report upon all OECD countries. And they actually placed Israel for some things very high up and for some things not so high up, which you can kind of imagine. So anything that's to do with sort of government initiated legal recognition, not necessarily flying colors. On some of the stuff, by the way, we were one of the early adopters. So for example, not non-violence against the LGBT plus community. So some of the laws in Israel are actually much older than in some OECD countries, including in some countries in Europe, which is maybe surprising to some people. But obviously on things like parental rights, workplace rights, we're still quite far behind. I think like many things in Israel, there's a mix. So, there's quite good social acceptance, generally speaking. And I think the courts are quite good at recognizing certain rights, but obviously there's certain elements in government that make it difficult to pass legislation. There's still a very long way to go, especially for the trans community that face challenges that I think nobody else in the LGBT plus community faces in quite similar, or at least the vast majority of the LGBT plus community don't face in the same way. So we do, they're a relatively small portion of the community, but by numbers wise maybe, but they're actually, we do tend to try and put a focus on that community because I think they need more help than many of the other aspects. And I think they're where maybe, gay guys were 30, 40 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, I don't know, a long time ago. And so it's important that we, as the sort of the stronger part of the community, really help put a focus and improve, their message.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were talking to Alicia and Ella, they were explaining the situation for trans people and how difficult it is for many to find work. Just great that you work in that area. That's brilliant. Cool. What else I was going to ask you? Hold on a second. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your background, I guess. So what is it? So this isn't your day job, okay? You're a volunteer. You're a board member and a volunteer at LGBTech. So what do you do? What's your day job?
So we like to split it as the gay job and the day job. So being the director of LGBTech is my gay job. My day job is I'm a partner at a law firm in Tel Aviv. So I do corporate and finance law, M&A, high tech and sort of banking work, usually on international transactions. So I tend to act for non-Israeli players entering the Israeli market, or for Israeli companies that have an international sort of element to them, and that's what I sort of spend my day-to-day doing and day-to-night doing, I guess, for most of the time. You gave me a good excuse to leave the office relatively early today.
Excellent. So, so how was it finding work in Israel? Was it, being a lawyer? Obviously, that's often a very certain skills or qualifications that are very specific to certain countries. But yours is international work, yes?
So my work is international. I worked at one of the sort of the big global firms in London and Paris. So my experience, I guess, was quite valuable, and I was very lucky. I mean, I found a job really very, very quickly after I arrived. I'd sort of already scoped it out before I arrived. So for me, I was very, very lucky. Also, I'm a native English speaker, and a lot of the work in Israel, definitely in the fields that I practice, is done in English anyway. So if anything, that's a massive advantage. Obviously, I do speak Hebrew, so that was helpful as well, but I had to requalify in Israeli law as well. And, there are some things that are harder for me, as a non-native Hebrew speaker and as somebody who didn't, train in Israel. But generally speaking, it's good. And I think it's an advantage. And actually one of the things, just connecting it back to LGBTech for a second as well, that I think I was able to bring from my international experience and from working at a massive global firm that it does put a focus on LGBT plus employee resource groups, etc., was really taking my experience from the UK, and I spent some time in New York as well. So, the UK and the US, and seeing how corporates and companies can really affect both the social and the legal agenda. So, in the US, for example, where healthcare is a massive issue. There's no national health service like there is in the UK. A lot of companies, a lot of the big, especially global, but big national companies would pay for healthcare for same-sex partners long before the courts have come in. And, even in the last few weeks, the courts are still doing things in the US on that front. So, I really believe in the power of companies to affect the social agenda where governments don't necessarily come in and do that. And that's, I think, one of the big reasons also that we started working with companies and putting the focus there, because we really believe that, they can influence both government policy, but also just social policy. And also, I think it is important to point out that, we don't go to companies sort of seeking their charitable help. Hey, come and help the LGBT community because we're weak and we need your help. Like, we do believe, I very, very passionately believe that it's a commercial benefit for companies. In terms of attracting the best talent, retaining the best talent, giving a message not just to the LGBT plus community, but to all other minorities, and indeed to people who aren't in a minority, that we're a company that cares about its people. And I think that's a very strong message in terms of creating company culture. Obviously there are sensitivities with certain other minorities and communities, and you have to be sensitive to all kinds of people's beliefs. I think being interested in diversity and inclusion means you have to also be interested in diversity of thought. You might not always agree with that diversity of thought. You might not always agree with other people's opinion, but I think fostering a culture within a company that is supportive of LGBT plus people by nature means you need to be a company that also supports the ideas of other people. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll facilitate their ideas being influenced in the workplace, because if, for example, somebody has very homophobic views and demonstrates that, then that's affecting somebody else's ability to be themselves in the workplace, to give themselves and to just be themselves. And so that's obviously not acceptable. But that doesn't mean that you have to tell them they must change their view. Obviously you might want to influence them for the positive, for something that you think is right. But I think that's an important point to point out.
Yeah, I think everyone has, a lot of, I said probably the majority of LGBT people have had some kind of situation at work. I had, in a job in another country, had to sit and listen to a conversation that was happening at the next desk cluster. It was in Sydney, and the Sydney Mardi Gras had just taken place, and the whole conversation about why do they need a parade, what's happened to straight pride, and blah, blah, blah. And the same thing. And it's, as I was sitting there listening to it, I was thinking, I'm not going to let this affect me, but it sinks in, and it slowly kind of eats away. And I ended up going to HR, and they were wonderfully supportive. It was, again, a large multinational American company. And so the HR person I spoke to said, we were just about to do some diversity training. We'll target that particular team first, and they can go through that training, which was, I have no idea what follow-up there was, but it was made the right noises and said the right things, and allayed my fear. So that was great.
So I think two things about that. So first of all, just to add that, what's different about the LGBT plus minority, and I think it's different to every single other kind of minority there is that every single other minority is represented within the LGBT plus community. You have Black LGBT plus people, you have physically maybe disabled people within the community, you have people of every kind of ethnic and religious background, obviously women in the LGBT plus community. So I think one thing that's special about our community is that when you do seek to improve diversity and inclusion for the LGBT plus community, by definition, you're going to have to be alive to some of those issues. So that's the first thing I want to mention. And I think the second thing is a lot of the work we're doing with companies. Often, for example, they'll say to us, but we've got Joe, and he's the gay down the corridor, and there's Maya, and she's the lesbian, or whatever it is, and everything's fine in our company. And I think often companies and employees don't necessarily understand the way that everyday conversations like the one you mentioned might impact other people around them. So I think part of our work is educating companies and bringing them, making them alive to some of those nuances that they might not have thought of, and then helping the companies find ways to deal with that. For example, by making sure that HR are aware of the kind of things they need to give training on, by making sure that, especially senior people, if they ever hear conversations like that, don't just shut up and let it go, but actually do make a point of saying, actually, at so-and-so company, we don't speak like that. We have colleagues that may be part of that community, and if you want to make your views heard, then you must be doing that in a respectful way, ask questions. So I think those kind of comments can really help people understand why there might be challenges for the LGBT plus community that they weren't necessarily aware of.
Absolutely. So you mentioned some of the other programs. Can you go into a little bit more detail about those?
Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got the Forum for LGBT plus ERGs, Employee Resource Groups. So we meet fairly regularly. We'll usually have an update from one or two of the companies just about the kind of things that they've been doing to give inspiration, to give ideas. We'll usually have either some sort of presentation or some sort of workshop. So for example, talking about what kind of ideas people might want to do for Pride. Again, this year, a bit different to previous years and hopefully future years. We did a survey last year, which was the biggest survey undertaken in Israel ever of LGBT plus people in the workplace. We had almost 1,000 respondents, bigger by several hundred than the only other major survey that's ever been undertaken. That was by the government. So we had one session where we presented the results of that survey, quite a lot of data, some positive and encouraging, but some obviously, as you might expect, less so. Still a massive percentage of LGBT plus people who have experienced some sort of discrimination in the workplace. Very often those are not even reported, either because people don't feel comfortable. A very large number of people who hesitate or are not out in the workplace, particularly in their first job, and even if they've been out before joining the workplace. We presented some of that data, and we work with companies to convey some of that data and try and obviously make sure that people are aware of it and can try and do something about it. And that's one group. As I mentioned, we do work to support, where we can, other non-profits from the community, whether it's raising awareness or helping them raise money. And we're a non-profit of in ourselves, so there's limits to what we can do in terms of helping them raise money. But we need to raise our own money. But we do like to put some spotlight on some of the sort of maybe less sexy organizations, if you like. And so that's another thing we do. Our events is the third thing we do, obviously working with the companies, trying to think if I've forgotten any other sort of major head of the activities we do. I think that's kind of the major stuff.
Okay, wonderful. Fantastic. And so what is it that motivated you to get involved? You mentioned it's 7 years since you made Aliyah. You wanted to meet people and you wanted to get involved with something. What was it about LGBTech that motivated you, that grabbed you?
So this might be a slightly surprising answer, because I think people don't generally say things like this, but I don't really believe in 100% altruism. Like, I don't think people do volunteer work or give of themselves for purely selfless reasons. Like, you have to get something out of it to motivate you to do it. So for me, part of that is just the good feeling of doing something positive, which can be, it's something you're getting, but obviously it's relatively selfless. For me, it was a way to also meet potential business contacts, personal and social contacts. Like, a lot of my closest friends in Israel today are either people I knew from back home before I made Aliyah, or people I've met through LGBTech, and the vast majority fall into one or other of those categories. But that's kind of the sort of, I suppose, the smaller, more honest answer. I think the sort of the broader answer is also that I passionately believe in diversity and inclusion for the LGBT plus community, and generally, I passionately believe in the power of companies to affect that change. And so, and I'm also the kind of person that can't just sit around and do nothing all day. So, when I came along to some events and enjoyed them, and was happy to get involved, and it kind of snowballed from there. So that's kind of what motivates me. I mean, we've got a board of seven members. We've got a host of other volunteers that help out with events and with various things. And we're always happy to hear from people who want to get involved. But because we're a non-profit, we've got a non-volunteer staff of one, and even that's not yet a full-time job. And Alon is fantastic; he's our resource development director. It does mean that a lot of the time where we want, where we do get assistance for people, it needs to be people who are self-starters and really can sort of just get on and do things, which is helpful. It's a nice bunch of people. We do interesting events. We hear from world leaders and interesting, inspiring people from all over the world. So why not?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I like about LGBTech as well is that a lot of the events, a lot of your speakers are from overseas, and so a lot of the events are very inclusive of the English-speaking community as well. So welcoming to Olim. So
look, I mean, one thing that's interesting is that actually another thing that I haven't mentioned is that we've run now a couple of times a list of top executives, LGBT plus executives in Israel. One of the things we found is that there's not that many very senior people that are out as LGBT plus in Israel, which may be partially a factor of numbers and the way the industry in Israel works. But the numbers, that can't be the full explanation, because the numbers just don't make sense.
You're sending us a few closet cases, yes? Is that what you're trying to say?
I wouldn't describe it as closet cases. I just think it's maybe people who are not comfortable being out in the workplace for whatever reason. I mean, we know companies that have told us of experiences of employees where these are really liberal companies, and they've discovered employees that were worried about coming out because of their career progression. They're like, but we're like one of the most liberal companies in this country. How can you be worried? So I think, especially if you're going to people who are more senior and they obviously started their careers 10, 20, 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago, the circumstances were different. So we ran those lists, and I think one of the things we found is that people were either there weren't that many people that we could put in those lists at a very high level. I mean, there are some excellent people there, but that was one thing. Or where we did find some people that we thought were worthy of being in the list, quite often we were told that they don't want to be in the list. And they said they didn't want the publicity for themselves or whatever. And I think, for us, the point of that list is obviously to give an honor to somebody who we think is worthy of a position in the list, but it's also actually more so to inspire others and to show that you can be out in the workplace and succeed. So I hope that if any of those people are listening or hear this recording, that they'll take that on board and remember that the lists are an honor for them, but not really about them, and more about people who are starting their careers or earlier on in their careers.
Oh, we've lost you.
To see that there are role models and bring inspiring people from abroad, because obviously there's really amazing people abroad who can who can inspire and show that you can succeed and do amazing things whilst being out of the
And speaking of honours, I guess we should mention you were mentioned, or you were, what's the word I'm looking for? You were honoured by Outstanding as one of the future leaders. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so there's an organisation called Outstanding, which is a UK-based organisation, although it has global remit, and they actually have several brands. So Outstanding is the one dealing with LGBT plus people, but they have one for ethnic minorities and for women generally as well. And they publish lists every year of the top executives globally and the future leaders and the allies for each category. They also have a new list, or relatively new list, for public service figures. So they have 4 lists for each category. Shachar, who founded LGBTech, was on the main list for a few years running. I was honored to be on the sort of the future leaders list a couple of times. Netta Feller, who's the chief people officer at a company called Natural Intelligence, which is one of our biggest supporters, was on the allies list a couple of times.
Nice.
We had a couple of other people in the future leaders list in the first year that we submitted names as well. So we've managed to put Israel on the map a little bit, and also actually have run events with Outstanding with Suki Sandu and his organization. So he spoke at one of our events physically here, actually twice. He's been to 2 of our events, last Pride and in I think it was February or March of 2017. So that's what that was about, and yeah, it was
fantastic.
Nice to be honoured, but really one for the whole team.
Yeah, absolutely. Good on you. So I just wanted to open up to the people that are on the live call. Does anyone have any questions for Jeremy? Don't be shy.
So are you looking for any more volunteers?
We're always happy to have volunteers. Definitely, if you have certain skill sets, always looking for graphic designers, always looking for people to help run events. Obviously, at the moment, events, probably physical events, slightly less relevant, but definitely get in touch after the event. We'd love to hear what you'd be interested in doing, and for sure. And if not, at least you should be coming to the events.
Absolutely. And so how do people hear about the events? Where do you advertise them?
So we've got several places. So we've got a Facebook page, LGBTech. We've got a Facebook group, which is LGBTech Israel. We have a meetup page. For those that know Meetup, again, LGBTech. We've got Instagram, we've got LinkedIn. So all those forums, all our events generally get published. But if you follow the Facebook page and or the Meetup page, you'll for sure hear about our events. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, not all of our events are open to everyone. Some of them are bespoke for HR professionals or whatever. But definitely for the general events, you'll hear about them there. And obviously, once we know who you are, or if we hear about you being relevant to a bespoke event, then obviously you'll be invited to that.
Good stuff. When you mentioned,
by the way, I should mention, like, even representative on the screen, almost everyone, I'm judging based on name, but I'm making assumptions. Everyone here except for one, I think, is a guy. We do, I want to make it clear that we do put a focus, and that's part of the reason we changed our name as well, making sure that our events are diverse as well. Our board is 4 and 3. And we're really keen to always make sure that we have plenty of women, plenty of people who aren't either L or G at our events. I hope that message will also go out, and you're always welcome, and to give feedback if you think there's something we could be doing better to encourage that. I mean, I think by nature of many events and organizations, there tends to be a certain bias, but often towards gay men, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be that way, and that's not our aim. So everyone is very welcome, allies too, by the way, but obviously our events are mainly focused on the LGBT+ community, and so everyone as well.
Fantastic. One thing you mentioned before as well, that again, from the name LGBTech, the focus is on, or has traditionally been on tech companies, the high tech industry. But there's a growing move to broaden that a little bit. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the name is historic, but we're definitely working more and more with companies that aren't just in the tech space. We already work with a couple of banks, and we're in touch with companies from all sorts of sectors. Retail, industry, whatever it may be. There's definitely not only a need in tech companies, you could maybe even argue that there's more of a need in non-tech companies, because as a whole, they tend to be more liberal and open anyway, and not always, or not always as much as they think. But we're open to all companies. We work with all kinds of companies. So yeah, by all means. Fantastic. By the way, I should probably also mention, I didn't mention before in the programs, but we do also do things together with A Wider Bridge, which is an organization that bridges the US and Israel. They're very kindly one of our sponsors. We've had some grants from the Schusterman Foundation. We've had various grants from philanthropic organizations, and I thought it appropriate also to mention them, to show our support and to say that, we do work quite often with other organizations in all kinds of ways.
Fantastic. Wonderful. That's great stuff. Are there any other questions? Oh, no, you're breaking up a little bit there, Rafi.
I'll type it.
Okay, you're going to type. I know why it's breaking up. Okay, that's a shame. But yeah, if you type into the chat window, makes me more than happy. In the meantime, are there any other questions? Wonderful. Trying to think what else I wanted to ask you. So what age were you when you moved to, you said you were born in Paris, moved to London?
I grew up in London from the age of not even 2. So
okay, fair enough.
Paris is an anomaly of my parents' trajectory, but no, I grew up in London. I lived in Paris just under 2 years. I lived in Paris briefly afterwards, again for work as an adult, and I've lived in New York for a little bit, but most of my life was in the UK and mostly in London until 7 years ago.
Nice one. Okay, so Rafi's saying if you were so Rafi's planning on moving here. So if I'll be entering the job market in a year, hopefully high tech, do you have any tips on how to do so?
So a few things. First of all, by the way, once a month we have job postings in our group as well. So we encourage companies to make posts available. Obviously, it depends. High tech could be many different things. So if you're talking as a programmer, or depends what you're looking to do. But so the first thing is you can always check out our group, and there are often postings there. Israel, I think more than most other countries, is a country of connections.
Oh, no, you've frozen for a second there.
One of the reasons I looked for the network, and one of the reasons that networks are good, is because it doesn't take too long to a company that you might be targeting, and somebody and we work with a lot of them. I guess a year is a long time by Israeli standards, and I think especially at the moment when there's a bit of instability in the marketplace, I think it would be in the workplace, it would be far too early to do anything concrete. That doesn't mean it's not too early to start reaching out to the kind of companies you might be interested in and making connections. But I think sort of nearer the time, you might be looking to reach out to try and find connections at those relevant companies. Obviously, again, depending on what kind of role, LGBTech might be able to help connect you with the relevant HR people or the relevant, LGBT+ representatives in those companies if we know anyone. And I think the idea is just to put yourself out there and go for it.
Yeah, one thing I see a lot on Facebook I think it's in LGBTech and in other Olim groups as well. It's like, do I know anyone who works at so-and-so company? And people are looking for connections so they can put in a good word or something like that. I think
something that Olim probably recognize much more than people who grew up in Israel is the value of networking. Like I think networking in Israel as a whole is not understood as much. When you say to people, you know, maybe set up an employee resource group, they don't necessarily automatically understand what the benefit of it is. They think they can get to anyone anytime. But when you have a personal connection, whether it's something that you're a member of the same community or you have a shared experience, that always strengthens your relationship. And I think that's one of the great things. Like if somebody connects you to, I don't know, another gay person at a company. Yeah, I'm doing a deal at the moment where, you know, what the person opposite me on the deal happens also to be gay, and you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get on with them, but I think there is an automatic added element to the relationship that makes it, you know, you have a shared experience that you tend to want to help somebody in that way and tend to want to work together more cooperatively. So I think, you know, that's one of the benefits of our community and of communities generally, is that you do get to find the people with a shared experience. So I think that's something to take advantage of.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you very much for that. Good stuff. Any other questions before we wrap things up? No? Okay. Wonderful. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Jeremy, for coming along. It's been really interesting talking to you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, I hope to come along to another LGBTech event soon. All right.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks very much.
Everyone.
And thanks
Bye-bye.
to everyone who joined us this evening. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Doc. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.